Um, Now, Kerry, you've talked about having the team behind you. Now, when you got to the point of saying, "Yep, I want to purchase BrandSpecs," and you sat down and signed the sale and purchase agreement, and you started hitting that day one due diligence period, what were the things that you had to look at when buying a business through your due diligence?
It's a long time ago now, Doug, but there's been a lot happened since then.
Yes.
But there are a few things that you need to think about.
Yep.
So, firstly, there's the possibly obvious ones about do the financials stack up? Have you done a sense check of a few key items on the profit and loss?
Yep.
And the balance sheet to make sure that they're accurate and true. So that was probably something that we did fairly early on. So that's almost a hygiene factor, as in it has to be.
Yeah.
But then there's some other things that happen along the way. So making sure that if you've got client contracts, can they be assigned? Firstly, can
Yes.
they be assigned, and then have they had a check? Has the vendor had a check with those contracts to make sure they're comfortable to be assigned?
Yeah.
Because if you are buying a business that you think is going to have a certain amount of value of contracts, and then they suddenly disappear on day one when you take over,
Yes.
that's a lemon. You're not buying the correct business. So,
Correct.
So yeah, client contracts would be a big one. Your finance is obviously key. So you've got to finance the business purchase. You've got to purchase the stock if there's any, but you've also got working capital that you're going to need. So that can grow arms and legs depending on the type of business that you're purchasing quite fast.
And when you've done that, what did you do to find out what were your requirements, say, for the first 3 months?
Yeah.
Because I've found that a lot of people come in and they buy the business and they never think about the next 3 months worth of working capital, because like a business like yourself it's all may be done on terms, so you might not get your first sort of injection of cash till about 45 to 60 days later. So what did you go through?
Yeah, so we worked with our accountants.
Yep.
We talked about the importance of having a good accountant. We worked with them to come up with a cash flow projection for the first 3 months and worst case scenario kind of thing. And you're right, we secured the funding for the working capital, brought it on board, but yeah, it was a good 45 to 60 days before anything hit the bank.
Yeah.
So that first few weeks it's all going one way. But thankfully, it does come right with careful management after that. So.
And what other factors did you need to look at besides the financials, supply contracts? What about lease agreements?
Yep, so lease agreements is a really good one that you mentioned. So we actually had a bit of a challenge with our lease agreement.
Yep.
There was provision for it to be assigned, all the rest of it was all going to go really easy. And then when it came to actually do the assignation, the landlord requested a bank guarantee.
Oh, yes.
And so that's something that when the vendors of our business had set up the lease agreement, bank guarantees had not been heard of.
Yes.
Back in the early 2000s. But by the time we came on board, only a couple of years ago to take over, they were very much part and parcel of a standard lease agreement. And so that necessitated extra funds to be made available for that bank guarantee. So.
And I have heard of that recently. So if you are looking for a business, make sure you're not leaving it after the due diligence, but before the due diligence and looking at the lease, that you actually need bank guarantees, because if you do, a lot of those bank guarantees need to be secured by property or cash, and if you don't have those and you've exhausted everything, it could actually jeopardize your funding requirements, and I can tell you all hell will break loose.
That's right. Yeah, it's very important. So, thankfully, we were able to come to some really good arrangements with our landlord, and those arrangements have continued, and so it's been good. Other than the lease agreements, I think people are really important.
Yes.
So we've talked about having great advisors and that kind of thing, but then the people within the business are important.